Very much, Lori. Hi, everyone. Happy Friday and good morning. Let's see if this all works. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. And you can hear me okay, I assume, as well. All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. My name is Lynn Yap, and I'm the author of The Altruistic Capitalist. I'm very excited to be here and talk about purpose-driven business and how we can get there. I have a traditional business background. As Lori mentioned, I graduated from Wharton with an MBA. I was actually a corporate lawyer and I worked in investment banking. I also worked in innovation for global consumer brands such as Adidas, where I saw how purpose can really drive consumer and employee engagement. So today I want to share my observations as to how the traditional capitalist model is changing. Then I will go on and talk about some of the macro trends that are accelerating the change. I will end with talking about the shift in leadership in order to get to creating purpose and profit. After that, we will get into groups and exchange some ideas. So let's get started. Now, some of you may recognize this ad. On the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see that this is a New York Times ad, full-page ad that Patagonia took out way back in 2011. Now, they were telling people not to buy their jacket. The ad said, don't buy what you don't need. Think before you buy. It went as far as to guilt us into not buying the jacket. You know, we use 135 liters of water. That's like a daily need of 45 people. The jacket generated 20 pounds of carbon dioxide when we made this jacket. Now, this seemed to be the complete opposite of what ads are supposed to do. All the other Black Friday ads talk about promotions and discounts, encouraging you to buy more stuff. Now, this ad said the complete opposite, and yet people still bought the jacket. And a few years later, Patagonia did another Black Friday campaign. This time, a few days before Black Friday, it announced that it will give away all the sales from that day to grassroots organizations. Since 1985, Patagonia has been giving 1% of their sales towards the preservation and restoration of nature. Now, Rose Macario, who was the CEO at the time of this campaign, had predicted that they will get about 2 million in sales on that Black Friday. Instead, they got a record-breaking 10 million just on one single Friday alone. And of course, everything was donated to the grassroots organization. And then later, she did something, again, quite surprising. The photo that you see right here, this is the Bears Ears National Monument. What happened was she decided to sue the President of the United States. Now, President Trump had issued a proclamation way back in 2017 where he wanted to reduce Bears Ears by 85%, essentially opening up this national monument for oil and gas leasing. This site is home to 5 Native American tribes and is quite popular amongst Patagonia, just general climbers climbers in general for the sport. The site contains lots of heritage and history and art for Native Americans. Now, what Patagonia did was to join forces with these tribes, and they sued the US government, claiming that the proclamation was illegal. Now, as we all know, litigation is costly, it takes a long time, and this decision by Macario, by the CEO, will use up company resources that could go back into shareholder profits. So how does this decision and the other 2 Black Friday campaigns be any good for the business? And yet, they were good decisions for Patagonia. Under Macario, the business of Patagonia quadrupled and it became a $1 billion business. So what does all this mean for capitalism? This here is Milton Friedman. He is famous for claiming in 1970, he wrote an article in the New York Times saying, the social responsibility of business is to increase its profit. He was a big believer in the free market. Supply and demand of the market should dictate how much goods are produced and how income is distributed, not the government. Corporate executives are agents of shareholders and therefore directly responsible to them. If people want to do good, they should do it with their own money, not with the shareholders' money. The interests of other stakeholders, such as employees, suppliers, and customers, are not of the concern of the corporate executive. So this is what he defined as shareholder capitalism, where profits come first. So social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. This, on the other hand, is Keynes. He has a slightly different view, or he had a slightly different view. He would have responded, capitalism is the extraordinary belief that the nastiest of men, for the nastiest of reasons, will somehow work for the benefit of us all. He was a little bit less optimistic about how well capitalism would work. He believed that government needed to step in. So think about government bailouts. That is a form of government stepping in. Yet today, we still have a planet that is burning up and wide gaps in inequality. So what is the answer? Now, for the most part, and for a long time, businesses assume that shareholder primacy, that is, profits has to come first, and that's the right way. But Friedman, the article that he wrote, that was way back in 1970, and times have changed. This view has been blamed for short-term thinking and profits at the expense of employees and the planet. So in August of 2019, 181 CEOs at the CEO Roundtable pledged to lead companies for the benefit of employees, suppliers, customers, their communities, the environment, as well as, of course, their shareholders. This is the new form of capitalism, stakeholder capitalism. This is not about one over the other, but is balancing every stakeholder's interest at the same time. Now, going back to Patagonia, Macario balanced the interests of the shareholders with that of customers as well as employees. While her Black Friday campaigns put the environment and her customers first, she balanced it with other business initiatives. She came from a private equity background, so she has a very strong finance background. She increased profitability of Patagonia by streamlining operations, updating their outdated systems, and managing their distribution with great discipline. So from that, she was able to combine her core values of protecting the environment to triple the profitability of Patagonia. So let's do a quick poll right here. Do you think businesses will need to be purpose-driven in the future? Ooh.
While everyone is voting, I just want to, we're going to share the slides with everyone. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And as Lynn takes breaks along the way, we'll be able to add the questions. I apologize for not saying something up at the front. I was so excited. I couldn't wait to get started.
Cool. Well, so the majority of people think that, yes, business do need to be purpose-driven, and I'm very glad to hear that, actually. Let's go to the next slide. So Laurie had teed it up a little bit earlier. What do the macro trends actually say? There we go. There we go. Okay. So what do the macro trends say? Let's look at it from the investor's perspective. So I mean, that's one of that's what we started with, right? The investors. So sustainable investments are growing like weeds. These investments are made up of impact investments, impact funds, as well as ESG funds. Now, just to be clear, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. These are public market funds, and they look at ESG practices. What are the risks? And they use these, they look at the practices and the risks at companies and use them to value the businesses. What is the impact of the company's ESG practices? For instance, think about improper disposal of toxic waste. That could lead to legal risk, of course. Negligence with workers, that could lead to strikes. Now, all of this is then taken into account to value the business, and before they decide in terms of which companies to invest in. ESG funds, on the other hand, value businesses based on their impact. Impact funds are private market investments, and they look at it from a positive impact. They value businesses in terms of how much value they actually create in terms of the planet and in terms of the community. Now, impact funds to date is around 700 billion in assets under management, and ESG funds have passed 1 trillion in 2020. There was a huge surge last year during the height of the COVID pandemic, and the demand for such funds are mainly driven by the millennial generation. There we go. Let's look at it from an employee stakeholder perspective. Now, if you want to be competitive for top talent in the future, you have to be purpose-driven. By 2025, millennials will make up 75% of the workforce. Laurie mentioned this earlier as well. This generation looks for meaning and purpose. It's not just about a paycheck. Surveys show that employees in purpose-driven organizations are healthier and more productive. When employees are happier, this leads to higher engagement and lower attrition rates. At Patagonia, their employee turnover is around 4%. And I'll compare this to other consumer and retail companies. Typical turnover rate is around 13%. So Patagonia is better able to keep their employees. Now think about the cost that is saving them. Even more so, working mothers, they have 100% retention. So every working mother in Patagonia stays at Patagonia. One of the reasons is that it was one of the first companies to put childcare facilities on their campuses. They also continue to promote women in their leadership roles. Through this and some of their other initiatives, Patagonia consistently provides value for their employees, and that's why they stay. What about consumers? We are becoming more conscious as well, who we buy from. There are certain companies that we will not buy from anymore. And so the State of Consumer Spending found that 62% of Gen Z and millennials want more sustainable products. Where are products coming from? What are the supply chain practices of these businesses that we're buying from? How do these companies treat their employees? What is the culture like at the company? And so at Patagonia, in spite of their Black Friday campaigns telling people not to buy, giving away money, they were able to quadruple their sales. Through consistent and authentic communication, Patagonia is able to grow their loyal customer base. Now, so we've now talked about why we need to be more purpose-driven. And to move from the profits-driven to a purpose-driven type business, the leadership mindset needs to shift. Now, this is not to say that financial discipline and business strategies go out the window. Financial discipline still needs to be balanced by more, financial discipline should be balanced by more humane leadership. I mean, think back to Rose Macario. She, like I said, she has a financial background, but she was also highly empathetic. She had great humility, and she had a strong sense of purpose that comes from mindfulness. Some of you may know she is a practicing Buddhist. She meditates regularly. This practice actually gives her clarity in decision making. So going back to the bear's ears case, now this is not so clear cut. I mean, it's a litigation. Should they actually have participated? Should they have invested company funds into something that's so that's costly and takes a long time? But for her and for the business, preserving nature is part of the interest of the business as well as the consumers. It forms part of her core values, the business core values, and is part of the strategy of Patagonia. So meditation, her practice of meditation helped her focus on her values and her purpose, so that when there was a decision to be made, there was really no conflict in her mind as to what she needed to do. She knew what was the right thing to do at the time. And that was to take action and to stand up for protecting the national heritage of Bears Ears. Now, just a few words on mindfulness. Mindfulness is about having no thoughts. Mindfulness is only for introverts and the self-absorbed. Mindfulness weakens your perseverance. These are myths. I have a daily meditation practice, and I've participated in 10-day-long silent retreats, device-free. There is no eye contact, no phones, no iPads, no books, no writing materials, completely device-free for 10 days. And I can tell you, I feel great afterwards because of the energy I get from it. During meditation, the brain waves that are dominant are theta waves, which are the brain waves that occur when you're brainstorming and when you're problem solving. Mindfulness actually helps you achieve your goals because through meditation, you are actually training yourself to stand apart from your feelings and objectively observe your surroundings. So you're not easily swayed by your emotions. And that is how you're able then to overcome challenges and to overcome stories in your head like, no, this is not me, I can't do this. But if you're able then to objectively just look at the situation, you're able better to stay consistent with your goals and to achieve your objective. Meditation, of course, also makes you more empathetic and thus better able to connect with others and promotes deeper relationships. Now, how does this relate to business? Of course, an empathetic leader is closer to their team. That sometimes then translates into a more empathetic team, especially in a time of COVID when we're all virtual. Having a higher level of empathy is very important. An empathetic team that better understands their customers can develop more innovative products. The practice of mindfulness is focused on the present, but really you only reap the benefits of mindfulness in the long term. You can't meditate for 5 minutes and say, yeah, I'm a great leader right now. It's all about the practice. Mindfulness teaches leaders to play the long game in business, focusing on greater impact rather than short-term profit. Being more mindful makes you more conscious of each moment and each decision. You become clearer about your priorities and become sharper in focus. This helps with aligning your customers, employees, and suppliers with your purpose and business. So under Macario, just to summarize, Patagonia emphasized its core values, which helped it become a $1 billion company and grow its customer base. So I just have one more quick poll. How do you think mindfulness can positively impact the workplace? Clarity in decision-making and business direction, improve mental well-being, increase empathy, leading to improved relationships? Or you don't think that mindfulness actually is very useful?
Can we pick more than one, or are we limited to just one?
I'm not sure how it's set up actually, but you could pick more than one. Just for me to understand what resonated with the audience. Increase empathy. That's, oh wait, clarity in decision making. We have a winner, but it's evenly spread with increased empathy. Cool. Okay. I think we are just about time where we move then basically to our little pods. I am a great believer in discussion groups and healthy debate. So I think now we split up into groups and go over some questions. I prepared some questions over here that could help you when you break up into your groups. Were there any parts of the presentation that resonated with you? If you have other examples of purpose-driven business, share it with a group. I'm happy to, I will drop into the different groups and I would be happy to hear some of those as well. What are your core values and purpose? I think, start of the year, it's good to reflect and kind of plan what it is for the year. How do your core values align with your purpose? So for instance, with Rose, she is someone who is very honest and very transparent. And so, think back to that New York Times ad. She said, "Don't buy this jacket." She said, 135 liters of water. And also, of course, it's very much closely linked to her purpose of protecting the planet. And then let's just end with share with the group that you're in. What is the one thing that you could do next week to be more purpose driven?
And I just want to share, Lynn, I've been watching, there's already been lots of discussion about opportunities in the chat of
cool.
that people are engaged in, or people that they know, family members. So you've already started planting some seeds. So
cool.
Be some great discussions in the smaller breakouts.
Hey Lynn.
Yes.
I would add strategy at an organizational level, or approach from a more personal level. To me, the three are values, purpose, and overarching strategy, which they all need to align.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, because Patagonia is linked to its market. I mean, the people who are their customer base care about this because they're out there in the environment. And so the synergy is just tremendous on both bottom lines.
Exactly. I mean, we always need to think about, okay, what's our core purpose? How does that then translate into the strategy? What do we do best as a business? Link that all up, because we can't save the whole planet. We can't do everything. So by focusing and by understanding ourselves as well, like what do we do best, and how does that translate and link up to the business, that really helps us to then execute. So agreed. Strategy, organization, also processes, like what the in terms of decision making, how are decisions made, how we are able to empower our team in order to do the right thing.
Oh, it's so funny. I believe Patagonia changed their purpose to saving the planet. So interesting.
Yes.
Say they're ambitious is putting it mildly.
Yes, exactly, Robert. They actually changed. So under Macario, it went from do no harm to actually we are going to create impact. So it was not just a standard hygiene protecting the environment. We're actually going to also do good for the planet.
Lynn, is this a U.S. centric kind of movement, or is this also being discussed around the world?
It is being discussed around the world. I have less knowledge for China, let's say. I can't read Chinese, so I don't have as much exposure into resources in that area. There is a movement, for instance, in the UK and Europe as well. Yes, actually a very healthy movement in the UK, for instance. Lots of social enterprises.
I sort of doubt that altruism is a big virtue in the People's Republic. Just a hunch.
But you may find over time that that's going to shift if they're going to compete and play in the global marketplace.
Yeah, and self-interest also plays into that. For instance, the incredible air pollution, particularly in Beijing, they've been working on things, and it fits between what Lori just said and what Lynn said, in that they're moving hard on electric cars and that technology.
So here's a disconnect that I see that jumps out at me. We know the terrible working conditions in China in the companies that build the Apple iPhone. I mean, they're well documented. And yet people will rush to buy the next model of iPhone.
You have to meet people where they are. I've been all over the globe to 40 different countries. 100 years ago, child labor was the norm here. Yeah, I'm not suggesting that child labor is a good thing. You just have to understand how economies evolve. And so while they don't observe the same practices we are, you got to have hope that they're moving in a direction that gets us all to the same place.
Well, I think at the root of that, Rich, is the idea of how the person is perceived.
I'm just suggesting you can't suggest your norms, U.S. norms on the rest of the world, because everybody's in a different place, and we all have to move forward together.
But I
And
think
I noticed in Europe over the last 8 years when I lived there, they were a little bit ahead of us on this topic. And
That's what I was going to say when Lynn
they,
said, go ahead.
one of the things they ran into was that what they found was a lot of the efforts they had, the things that they wanted, they would solve the problem in Europe, but they were just outsourcing the bad stuff, right? So they still buy the product, but it was produced somewhere out of sight, out of mind, and all the bad stuff was happening somewhere else. So they didn't see it, so they felt good. But I think what's changing now is we're getting more and more visibility, like the Apple visibility that David mentioned. We're getting more and more visibility into where this is happening, and that information is going to drive the market. And so I think there's a role here for government or somebody to expose as much of this as possible, so that people have the information to make a good choice. And once they have the information, I think that's the big difference between now and, say, back in the 70s or 80s. People now have the information about what the damage is, and as we get educated, I think the market will adapt. There's still going to be some things. There's still going to be some things that there's a cost to producing them, and we have to decide as a society whether we want to continue to use those products.
I think you bring up a great point, Tim. I think it's really consumer driven. Right now, the folks that are buying Apple products are valuing the product more than the makeup behind it. But I think you'll find a lot of places like Chick-fil-A, because of their quote unquote good Christian values and not supporting Planned Parenthood, not respecting people who have different sexual orientations, how many people no longer will use their products. Since we're a little bit more mature group, think back to the days of Anita Bryant when she first came out as being homophobic, and how Tropicana dropped her, very quickly because consumption dropped. And so I personally don't think it's a government responsibility. It is consumers that if we don't appreciate the values of the company, we have to show them with our dollars. It's unacceptable.
And it goes back to transparency and data.
Well, it's interesting. Levi's years ago tried to make a stand and continue making their products in the US, and they were higher priced, and they absolutely got crushed. Now there's only one version of Levi's that's made in the United States, and everything else is made in China. So to your point, Lori, that's absolutely true.
They should try again.
And I think it's interesting. I think some of the cycle or the circle is closing. So there are, for example, foundations that do great work with the dollars that they give away, but the dollars that they have invested are often in could be in funds that are sort of behind the wall, that are not aligned with their mission. And so there's a movement to make sure that both sides of that house are more aligned. And companies are looking at their suppliers more, because it just used to be more frontal with their stance. So I think the circle of what organizations are doing and making sure that they're speaking consistently across all of their voices is a trend, and will catch up with us in that way.
Yeah. So to your point, Leslie, sorry, so with Tim Cook, for instance, and I'm going to bring back as well, he's quite a mindful leader as well. He has a mindfulness practice, and he has been working in terms of cleaning up the supply chain since he started being CEO of Apple, and that is quite a shift then as well in terms of Steve Jobs, for instance. He has put very much focus, but thinking about the size of Apple, it of course takes a much longer time to turn the whole ship around. I was at Adidas before, and I also worked on purpose, and it takes a really long time to work all of that through all the different moving parts that go from sourcing of raw materials to putting things together to distribution. I think it's we have to start with a little step and continue taking those steps until we get there.
Using steps and Adidas as an example, Jeffrey Zwillinger. I don't know how many of you are aware of Allbirds as a type of shoe.
Yes.
They're completely green shoes, and the formulation of sugarcane-based EVA foam that he developed to make Allbirds comfortable, he's made open source. So any shoe manufacturer on the planet who wants to have cushioned shoes that don't use petroleum, he's made it.
I love my Allbirds.
Don't worry.
I want to interject that because we're having such great conversation as a whole group, we're not going to break out into breakout rooms and just continue sharing this across everyone. And Bob, I want to bring up the comment you put in the chat about this dichotomy or conflict internally with each of us, that we want to do good deeds, but we want to get the best value for our dollar. You know, we don't want to overpay, you know, and so each person has their own internal conflict of just how much are you willing to spend for those issues that are very near and dear to your heart. But at the same time, you're balancing, you know, a mortgage, putting food on the table, if you have children or whatever your personal needs are.
Very true. You have to spend a lot of time rethinking decisions, and sometimes you can't get all your values met. That's my problem. Is I look at a product, for instance, I'll take a cosmetic, and I'm absolutely not going to buy anything that was tested on animals. I'm not going to buy anything that's owned by a company that's a subsidiary. You know, the subsidiary doesn't test on animals, but they are owned by a company that does, or that sources product that already has been tested on animals, or sells to China, where that's, you know, required to be able to sell in China. So then you look at the packaging. Is it plastic, or is it glass, or is it aluminum, or is it cardboard, or is it recycled, or is it great? You know, it just gets, really gets difficult because you can get in the weeds with a lot of different values, and you sort of have to prioritize.
There's some, you know, there's a couple of things that I think make it simpler and other things that make it more complex. On the one hand, simply awareness of the value and the impact on societies and cultures can make it simpler because you're creating value. My TEDx, I talked about the chocolate industry, which is well known in West Africa. There is horrible working conditions, child labor, etc. And on the one hand, you can say, well, I won't eat chocolate. But if you stop eating chocolate, they're the ones that are having the greatest impact or in coordinating for-profit and not-for-profit activities in that sector. And so by eliminating, so the question is not, do you eat chocolate, which uses child labor? The question is, do you engage or not engage with an organization that you are hoping is having a serious and positive intent on what they're doing, or do you not? And that's another layer that I think is really important when you get into some of these complex issues.
Luckily, luckily there are more things that are becoming available that have answers. Like in the chocolate industry, you may be already aware of the brand Ted's Chocolonely.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful brand, great chocolate. They address exactly that issue, as well as some others. So you know, I don't have to buy Hershey's anymore. I can buy, that's a brand that addresses those issues and is readily available. You have to look a little bit for it. But I mean, we had to wait for that for a long time, right? It was really just Hershey's and Godiva and, you know, a few other brands.
Well, you can buy a lot of fair trade chocolate, and for what it's worth, having worked closely with the food industry, the bigs are finally moving in that direction and trying to transform that industry because they're feeling the pressure from consumers to do the right thing.
They also are feeling that, and one of the reasons that they drive that will accelerate them is when they recognize that some of these development activities and these positive activities also have direct multiple bottom line pressures. One is obviously on the consumer. In the chocolate industry, one of the things that caused the industry as a whole to begin moving towards more constructive sourcing is that they realized that they were actually going to have a crunch on chocolate. Chocolate trees take what, 5 or 10, 20 years to develop. And, you know, the really unsophisticated farmers were just not taking care of their trees. They were getting sick, they were dying. And actually, as they've been engaging with the farmers in West Africa in particular, they've been teaching them not only about child labor, but also helping them get education and taking care of the trees. And that helps with the origination of their raw materials, which helps them in other business ways as well. And so there is as much of a mindset shift as anything else. And I think that it's that mindset that can actually be far more powerful than just, oh, I do or I don't use slave labor, or I don't, you know, I avoid it. And I think that's something that we still have to get increased awareness of on the consumer base.
Feathering in concepts and taking different steps over time. That point is well taken. I understand that, Rod. I think you have a good point.
I would just add too, one thing we see with HopeWorks as a vendor, we train young people, is the social impact piece is very attractive to companies, not just on the customer side, but the Comcast and American Waters that hire us because they want to tell the story to their employees.
Right.
And that is something that we see a lot. And it almost always puts us over the top. If our services are comparable and our pricing is comparable, that story that a company can tell to their employees about how we're getting this technology product outsourcing, but also transforming the lives of young people, really puts them over the top. Even if the end customer never sees it, their employees feel great about it. So that's been an interesting dynamic we've seen that's really accelerated over the last 12 months.
I'm glad to hear that. I do work for a Fortune 100 company that, from the outside view, we are beholden to shareholders. I think that is still the mindset of many of the top echelon leaders. And, you know, I see that we're very forward moving. We had a program that started in the 70s called Pollution Prevention Pays. So that was very forward thinking of the time. We have some other, you know, very outward facing things that consumers can see, you know, that we're doing. Our campus is going to be 100% sustainable. I think it already is this year. So great things. But and I guess maybe I'm less patient with my own employer, but it's not something that I see. It's a little bit of lip service, and I just don't see it. I see it as like, yeah, that's a priority, you know, in addition. Sure, you know, we can do that, you know, down the road, whatever. We have some people that are focused on sustainability. I'd love to work with those people, but I just don't see. I think it, like someone earlier, Lynn, I think you said about Adidas, it takes a long time to turn a big ship. And in the meantime, you still have prevailing attitudes, which I continue to see in the very top tiers of leadership that are, you know, mostly middle to age to older age, you know, white guys that tell me, you know, that we are beholden to shareholder. We are beholden to the shareholders, period, the end.
So I think for many people, there's a misperception. Whenever I tell somebody I'm interested in social impact, they immediately say, oh, nonprofit. Because there seems to be, again, this hangover or belief that it's either mission driven or finance driven. And as Lynn showed, you know, some of the reasons to be mission driven are economically sound. Mm-hmm. If your turnover drops and you're not spending months bringing on new employees and bringing them up to speed, and the cost of training and time delay and lost productivity, you know, and those are measurable numbers that you have. It's not the touchy-feely of, I've been in HR for 40 years, and you say, well, happy people are more productive. Can you prove it? Well, their smile was 10% bigger this month than it was last month, and so I'm going to assume that that's X number of dollars. You're on kind of shaky ground. But you can talk about loss of productivity. You can talk about the cost of turnover. You can talk about the loss of consumers. And so what we need to be able to do is to show, like with Patagonia, making these social impact decisions increases profitability. They partner together. And so as we change those mindsets, I tilted windmills. I'd like to solve all the problems of the world at once, but we have to pick and choose. And so kind of what role can we play as leaders in the greater Philadelphia and New York area, as business people, as mentors, as leaders, as consumers, to help people understand that we have a responsibility and that it means multiple things at the same time.
Right. I totally agree. You're preaching to the choir, but I just, I personally, I guess I'm a little disillusioned because I've been hard at work at that. And I've gotten limited traction, but it takes a lot of us and it takes a lot of time, to Lynn's point. So, I'll keep trying, and maybe in the interim, I'll stumble over someone that I'm better suited, my values are better aligned with.
When you see one of the largest, most creative companies on the planet, Amazon, signing the climate pledge, and they'll have all of their facilities powered by renewable energy within the next 3 or 4 years. They're forcing suppliers to reconfigure products by fining them if they don't make more environmentally sustainable packaging. They're driving. I know that people look at Amazon as kind of a bad guy sometimes, but having worked closely with them, Jeff Bezos takes the long view on everything, and they're really going to make a difference in the long term in terms of environmental protection.
Yeah, there is no really white hat and black hat in this. I mean, there are lots of gray. I do have to remember that, because I look at Amazon as the bad guy sometimes, but they do a lot of good also, to your point, Rich. I mean, and taking the long view is the point, I guess. I suppose that at the end of the day is the point.
There's two, just build on what Lynn, you said earlier about the business case for this. There's two really important ones that I'd like to make sure that we add on to what you said. One is relationship management. It's not just directly the sales that you make, but it's also, if you have the right intent to develop a meaningful relationship with a particular supplier group, customer group, whomever, that has a lot of value in terms of the communication that you're getting. And it's not just direct sales, but it's the quality of the sales and the quality of the innovation that you're getting around that. And that pays particularly important times when you're talking about risk management. A lot of the companies that I've been speaking with around some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion topics in particular, they are very receptive once they understand, yes, it can directly improve your bottom line, but they also realize that when and if something bad happens, if they don't have the right relationships with the African-American community, LGBTQ community, et cetera, that is going to have this, there's this big risk factor that they're taking.
Yeah.
So it's risk mitigation. Yep.
There's also,
go ahead, Brian.
There's also, we shouldn't just assume it's the Amazons and the Apples of the world. I do a lot of work with entrepreneurial companies, 250 people and less. And one of the things that we do with them is to help them define the vision for the company. But one of those components is, what is the long-term, one big business goal that the company is trying to achieve? And that's trying to help align the entire workforce to what that goal is. And that goal is shifting away from what used to be very much number driven. We want to be a $50 million company. They're finding a business case to be made and to embrace the idea that if we're improving stakeholder outcomes in their lifestyle, in their just life happiness, it doesn't have to be a number. They get a better alignment, a better buy-in if that long-term business goal is something that is helping somebody, whether it's the employee as a whole, the employees as a whole, or whether stakeholders, customers, whatever. So, it's big and small, I guess.
I'm proud of what we do for our customers. I'm very proud of that. So yeah, I mean, I may be being a little harsh. It is a Friday. I'm tired.
Well,
So thank you for
I
the
think
input. That's good. It's good to see. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I tend to see, I want to get it all done like yesterday.
Tim, you were going to share something?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is industry
3M,
specific too.
it's,
Some of it's
done.
easier than some industries have it easier than other industries.
Yeah.
But I think, like Brian said, it begins with a vision. If you look at Volvo, they're in the automotive industry. It's very hard for them. That's a very difficult industry to change because of the complexity of the supply chain and where they get their parts and everything. But Volvo has a vision that they set forth, and they're moving towards that, and they advertise the progress that they're making all along in this lane. And another company I saw do that was Nokia. And they're both European companies, and it's kind of the culture over there and kind of more of a trend socially. So I think they view their stakeholders as being more progressive in this way.
Yes.
But I do think a lot of it is company specific. A lot of the companies, it's not hard for them because they have their supply chain isn't as complex. It may not have as exotic materials. The world market that supplies them is what it is, and they can't change that. So it's not an easy problem. But I think as Brian said, I think it all starts with the vision, a long-term strategic vision.
I agree with that. And a female voice asked what company I work for, and I work for 3M. And so Tim, that actually ties precisely into what you just mentioned. 3M is global, and we are highly diversified manufacturer. We're in industrial, we are in automotive, we're in healthcare, we're in drug delivery, we're in skin and wound. We're in a lot of different businesses with a lot of different distribution, ways to market, business models, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that definitely contributes to the complexity of it.
Howard, you had your hand up?
Yeah, so I wanted to say a word or two from a corporate governance perspective. So as we all know, the national pastime is not baseball, it's litigation. And anybody can sue anybody for anything on any given day. And, serving on boards, you are aware that everything you do or don't do is potentially, evidence for why you didn't fulfill your fiduciary duties at some point down the road. Now, it's normally driven by some bad outcome, but nobody knows the future. So even great plans can go awry. So the way that boards attack this ESG question is a number of ways. First of all, I'm given to understand under Delaware corporate law that it is entirely okay for a board to decide that it wants to engage in various trade-offs, whether they're short-term versus long-term or this versus that. The key is that they're explicit about it and that they put in the record, in the minutes, what they did and why they did it, and that it was for the benefit of the long term of the company as they see it. If they do that, they'll be covered by the business judgment rule, which is a very deferential standard under the law. That doesn't mean there won't be litigation. It just means they should win. And the problem is if you do these things without acknowledging what you're doing and why you're doing it, then it may appear improperly that you've moved resources from A to B without considering why doing that and how that benefits the company as you determine it. So it's important to be explicit and create a record of why you do things. And I just wanted to mention that it's a very big topic in the corporate governance. I'm very active in the American Bar Association and been vice chair of the Corporate Governance Committee. It's something we talk about a lot. And what you want to do is create cover for yourself. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, you want to make sure that what you do doesn't create the wrong kind of reaction. There's a phrase in Latin, a motto, esse quam videre, which means to be rather than to seem to be. And so what boards are hearing is beware of doing things just for optics. You've got to be concerned about reputational risk. You've got to be concerned about what people think of you. But if you do things just for appearance, people will sniff that out in no time. So you can't just do things because it looks good. You've really got to be it, because you won't get away with just trying to put on a face. So let me pause there. I wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, I think that's important. Some of the B corporation laws, not the nonprofit, which is great as well, but the laws are extraordinarily important. One of my partners represented Ben when Ben & Jerry's was being sold, and in Vermont at that point, the fiduciary responsibility required them to have the bidding process. We represented Ben in trying to take Ben & Jerry's private using an ESOP as part of the funding mechanism, as well as the ability to protect themselves from other takeovers, and just got outbid. And the board, under the law there in Vermont, had no choice. And that's, to some extent, I like to, at least I hope to think that was a driver for the changes to allow boards of directors of corporations to take these other pieces into account with more protection from being sued about the fiduciary numbers impact.
I think there's also another issue is how do you measure the social impacts? And part of the problem, the Federal Reserve of San Francisco did a study, and we're sharing a presentation about companies tend to measure outputs instead of outcomes, which goes back to that conversation of longer term relationships, of being, authentic, being true, not just being, an image. So they put on a presentation, and the example they gave was, Fred is unable to, he's homeless. So he goes to a homeless shelter, and they can measure how many nights in beds, that's how they measure how successful homeless shelters are, is how many bed stays they get. But what happens is Fred really has depression, and his depression makes it difficult for him to keep a job. And instead of just going to a homeless shelter, if they had a psychologist there who helped him deal with his depression, then he would be able to hold a job, and he wouldn't come back because now he could afford his own place. But that's an outcome, and those are much more difficult to measure, and people are less willing to fund until you get there. So there seems to be lots of issues of integrity, authenticity, vision, harmony, the choices we have to make, and how do we measure it, and to whom do we give those metrics to?
And to add to that point about impact and an earlier point about organization and processes, one of the issues about impact is oftentimes budgets are measured on an annual basis with companies. We can only measure it, you get the money, you apply for the funding 18 months before, and then you do the project, and then you're supposed to see the ROI, the return in a year. But we know when it comes to the planet, when it comes to our people, we don't see the impact. And you can't really measure some of these things. Yeah. So we need to start thinking about things differently. It's the same with innovation. You can't measure the outcome or the benefits from an innovation in 1 year. Same with social impact. Think about it. It's even longer than innovation. Sometimes it'll be 5 years. It'll be 10 years. And what is it that you measure? Are they the direct impacts or the indirect impacts? One example I'm going to give is at Adidas, the supply chain, the factories are not owned by the company. But they have long-term contracts with suppliers. So these are long-term supplier contracts with the factories. But one of the things that Adidas does is to provide, for instance, financial training to, of course, many of them are women who work in the factories to put the shoes together. Because financial training, and then there's buses as well, so that there's safe transport to and from the factories. But what is it that you measure? Do you measure the indirect impacts that come from when they leave being a factory worker because they have now improved their education, they're able to move up? How do you measure that? That is hard to measure. The direct impact that you measure is that yes, there is retention and less training expenses because people say those are the direct impacts. But there are lots of indirect impacts that you cannot measure with some of the things that you put in place. So again, going back to this, it's social mobility. What is it? The children gets better educated because there's better compensation, for instance. So this is a very new topic, and one that's growing, and one that we're still learning. But yeah, I'm very excited to hear everything that's being said here, because I'm very passionate about this.
It's multimodal, and on a global basis, if we spent money to make the world a better place, it would be to educate women, right? That would probably have the largest single impact of anything that we could do.
Globally, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Rich, we're going to make a poster of you to send around to everyone. As a point of reference, venture capital, only 2% is given to women entrepreneurs, and yet they pay back at a higher rate. They have higher dividend. They also tend to invest more in the communities where they are. They hire local, they invest local, they deal with other small vendors. So it is a far better choice for the venture capitalists, yet they only give 2%. And if you look at women of color, that's an even smaller percentage that comes out of the 2%. So Rich, we're going to bottle you and take you on the road.
Well, I'm currently advising a young woman of color who recently was named to Forbes 30 under 30 retail entrepreneurs. So
fabulous.
So one of the things that is coming out for me today, very loud and strong, is even this group right here, it has tremendous commitment, tremendous vision, has fingers on the pulse, are actively pursuing, social impact and sees the value. It's almost like Lynn's having the opportunity to sing to the choir and to help us, refine our direction to, as well as each other, to point out things like, did you know about this group? And Bob's nephew has done a video and things like that. So how can Lynn, how can David and the Beacon South Jersey group help to foster and continue all the great things that you all have already started, so that we don't lose this momentum, we don't lose the strength? Because, unfortunately, some people had to drop off at 9 o'clock for other commitments, but we had 19 people on today who truly give a damn and want to make a difference. And how can we collectively together, we will share Lynn's slides, we will share the video and the chat from today, because so many wonderful things were in the chat today. How can we help you? How can we take those next steps? What do you need, and how do we help each other?
I think you're already at a great point, because we're sharing information. I've learned a tremendous amount this morning from others. So that is already an accomplishment in and of itself. We could continue to learn from one another. That would be that's pretty basic, but I think that is, we can continue to get new people interested.
Yeah, each one teach one, right?
Right.
Yes, I was going to say that. Like, if each one of us today just told someone else later today at lunch or something, what we have learned, a new piece of information, and you tell that person, you need to pass it on to the next person. Imagine the amount of people that will start thinking about business in a different way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So one of the other things I want to offer, and I apologize for putting in another plug for WASIC, but Susie is heading up our interview team. And what we're looking to do is to, on our website, we have a part called Spotlight. And right now it's pretty dull. It's kind of the same 5 pictures of companies that our ambassadors support. But we're changing that to have live interviews. That'll be about 15 minutes in duration, because that's the attention span of the average American adult these days.
That's 8 seconds, sorry.
I'm sorry, what were you saying, Rich?
That's 8 seconds. Yeah.
Well, I'm a little more optimistic. I'm going to go 15 minutes.
You'll do better with 5.
It depends on how compelling the topic. And so if you are interested, and there's so many wonderful things that have come out today, things that you are already involved in, points of view that you have, reach out to Susie and to me, and maybe we can highlight for you on our website what you're working on. Yes. And so I love that, each one teach one. As a matter of fact, I'm going to steal that, Rich, if that's okay with you, and make that one of the titles of the section, of people sharing what they've learned, perspectives, best practices, so that people who want to do the right thing may not know how yet, or want to do it better, faster, smarter, wiser, that we have that opportunity. So please take advantage of that opportunity, again, to reach out to Susie or to me and say, I have a really cool, compelling story that I want to share that will excite and enlighten other people.
And it could be something you've personally experienced, or it could be someone that you know, or it could be something that you indirectly witnessed. And Lori, I'm so glad that you're awake and have had enough coffee to remember that, because this is exactly the kind of group I need to be mining for material for these quick, very non-scripted, entertaining, casual interviews. And I need help with that, because this is kind of a new thing for me. And I would be thrilled to hear from any of you about, what your interest is. And, maybe we could just hammer out a topic. Janine Scaff, I'm looking at you.
And we're looking for interviewers as well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Because I can't do all this. I can't reach the level that Lauren is Laura's setting some stretch goals for me.
We do have 6 people on the team, but we can never have too many.
That's right.
So while we have Lynn here, is there anyone who has another question that you'd like to ask Lynn? She will be taking a more active role with WASIC, and we'll have an interview with her about her upcoming book. As a matter of fact, Lynn, why don't you give a little plug for your book, which we hope will be out in April?
Yes, it will be out in April. Thank you very much. You already heard some of my ideas today as to why we need to change. And the book is really about the mindset of leaders and how we can better lead our teams, manage the teams in order to balance the different interests of stakeholders, because there will come a time when we will have to make those difficult decisions. And the book is filled with different practices from interviews I conducted, as well as research that I did.
Could you put the information about your book in the chat, Lynn?
I don't have a website for the book. Shame on me.
Title?
Altruistic Capitalist.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, there you go. That makes sense.
Look at her LinkedIn. It's there.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, I can share the link to. I can share the link to the pre-sale campaign that I did just before the holidays. But shame on me. I'm still working on building the website for the book.
And do we have you in the interview queue for WASIC, Lynn?
Yes.
Okay, good. Making sure.
Absolutely. You know me, when I see somebody who has something that's fantastic to share with others, I'm not shy at all.
Yes, I know. That's good.
I have no pride. It's all about serving the greater good And I have to tell you that I am so impressed and so pleased with how this morning worked. And I'm glad we didn't break out into smaller groups, because I think the interaction, we were small enough that we could have everyone engage and participate and share what you're working on. I'm impressed by the wealth and breadth and depth of what you're all doing. I am on cloud 9. I'm thinking, wow, this year is off to such an amazing start that 2021 is really going to blow all the other years out, and that our country and our world are lucky to have all of you who are committed to making a difference. And I truly believe there are more of us than we know, but because it wasn't popular, it's hard to measure, we don't know how to have these conversations with each other. I remember, and again, it's nice to have a group that's my age or close enough that I don't feel like, oh my God. But when I was in school and somebody had done a profile, and I was caught because I had mission-driven hopes and dreams, yet I went to Wharton, I was expected to have profit. And they didn't blend at the same time. And if you were from Wharton and you said you were interested in mission, tree hugger, oh, you're one of those, goody two shoes. And so you couldn't tell anybody that it mattered to you. And now it's so great. You can wear it like, hey, I give a damn about the world. I'm hip, I'm cool, I'm in vogue. And so I think more of us will find each other. And I think that is so, it just makes me happy all the way. So you guys have absolutely enhanced my day. And I'd like to hear how you're feeling about today, what you might want to be walking away with, what action steps that you're thinking of doing, and how we can help you. So does anybody want to just share? I'm not going to go around and put anybody on the spot, but I would love to hear how people are feeling and if you'd like more of this.
Well, I'll just go really quickly. I would love to connect with Dan after this, because I'm really interested in their model of giving people the skills to get these higher paying jobs. Because I think that's something we didn't actually get into that much, but a part of Lynn's talk was about how one of the stakeholder groups you have to think about is your employees. And how do you get the talent in the pipeline? Well, you have to teach them from a young age and give them the skills they need, because then it ties into so many other things. If you think about it, if you don't have the luxury of making enough money per hour, you can't vote with your wallet, because you don't have the choice between paying 20% more for a good or service. So I think it all goes back to the education piece, and Rich talking about education of women and that, but I would love to just talk to Dan more after this about HopeWorks.
I'd love that, Zoe. And the only thing I'd add is, just as a guest, you guys are awesome. What a great group. So just thanks for including me. And HopeWorks is a social enterprise where we provide market services, but also train and employ folks. There's a whole crowd of us. It's like a secret world. So even if you're like, I don't need a website or GIS, but I'm interested in a coffee company or soap, let me know and I can kind of let you in the door, so to speak. There's a national network of folks. So yeah, and as you can tell, I'll talk to anybody. But thanks so much for letting me join you today.
And you're always welcome to join as a member. I would be remiss if I didn't put that in. They'd kick me out of the club. So, who else would like to share?
I would say, Lori, I think it's interesting what you said about your early experience, because I think, I had the same sensibilities of realizing early in my post-college years that I was very mission driven. And that's what led me into the nonprofit sector. And then I happened to find my way into it through fundraising. That was just the part I knew and, developed expertise in. But I have been fascinated by watching the for-profit sector sort of merge over and have, create these, basically become mission driven, have like a dollar finance goal, but also be accountable for some purpose, make the world better in some way. That has been fascinating to me. And I'm really glad to see it. And I watch it very closely. So it's just interesting. I think we probably had the same sensibility, and it led us in two different, we sort of made two different choices about how to then go about our career.
Well said.
So Lynn, I'm thrilled that your Indiegogo blew up and you got more than you were looking for. But how are the rest of us now going to get an autographed copy?
Well, you can only buy a copy in April once that's published. I'm on a tight deadline of submitting the final draft on March 5th. And then if you write to me directly, give me your address, I will be happy to do a autographed copy.
Thanks.
Wonderful.
And
Thank
you
you.
can count on, we'll let everybody know when it happens. We'll have a launch party.
Yes, actually, let's do that. I would love to do another session and go into more detail. There's so much from the book that I didn't go into today. So much from my research, just because of timing. So, yeah.
We could do a joint, Lori, we could potentially do a joint, depending, I have to look at the book more, we could do a joint beacon with nonprofit in South Jersey, because it really sort of straddles both of our areas.
We would love it, and Leslie will pick up New York too.
Fantastic. And what I was going to say too is, one thing that comes out of this discussion is how each of us can help move our organization or the organizations we work with forward. We've talked about one step at a time in many different ways. And, Susan spoke too about the struggles internally and how to move an organization forward. So if we have a launch party, it gives us an opportunity to learn more, and also to have that, 3 months from now, let's think about one thing that we've done in that regard, to pursue that and come back together.
I can give you a challenge. Depending on how much red meat you eat, if you cut your red meat eating way back, it'll have more impact than if you drive an electric car.
That's the premise behind Meatless Mondays, right?
Part of it.
Yeah.
Lori and Ops might want to participate, because I think we'd love that. Have a joint session.
Yeah,
This
that's
is fabulous.
interesting. Yeah.
Lynn, can you handle being in such demand already?
I'll try. Yes. No, very excited. I'm so energized by today's talk, and just having so many people wanting to share and wanting to do more. I had the same when I was doing the interviews and research for my book, because it's a great group of people who want to make a difference. And so thank you so much for your engagement and participation today. I really enjoyed it.
It's a wonderful presentation, Lynn. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
And again, we will make sure that everybody gets everyone's contact information. We'll include the video and the chat, because so much has been shared. And we really want to continue forward. Lynn, once we know when your book is going to be officially launched, we will schedule a launch party through multiple groups at Beacon. We'll add the Wharton Club of New York's social impact group, WSIG, along with WASIG, so you can learn a whole new vocabulary, everyone. We'll be excited to share any other. I want to be very conscious of time. We're at 20 after. We have committed networking till 9:30. Is there anything that anyone would like to also share?
Appreciation for you, Lori, pulling it all together.
Oh, that was the easy part. Thank you.
I would just say one thing, I didn't put it in the chat because I was just too lazy, but if you're interested, I've been sort of fascinated. The European Union adopted a really aggressive sort of green recovery. I think they're the most aggressive in the world. And every now and then I sort of dip in and follow them, because they've been much more bold and aggressive than we have about sort of coming out of the pandemic and the academic, whatever you want to call it, total tailspin that we went into. That sort of made them double down on we're going to recover with the environment and sustainability in mind. And it's just kind of fascinating to see the plan that they adopted, and how they're going about it. Manufacturing and production is part of it. There's just a whole bunch of components to it. But if you're kind of interested in the topic of, a huge government entity really taking it on, I think they're leading the way. It's kind of fascinating to watch. And you kind of have to go to their papers. It does not get a lot of coverage in our papers, I don't think.
I do want to share, my brother works for Morgan Stanley, and when Trump first pulled out of the Paris Accord, I was just heartbroken, and I called him ranting and raving. He goes, relax, relax. I'm like, how could you be so calm? And he said that even though the US had officially pulled out, the corporations had continued forward. It just wasn't, to your point, Janine, shared publicly, but the powers to be recognized the importance of climate control, climate change. So even though sometimes we don't see it happening, I had complained to him about, oh, they're giving away all the land in Alaska for all this drilling. He said, don't worry about it. Like, how can you be so calm? He said, because none of the investment banks would lend the money.
Yeah, interesting.
And so I felt a lot better knowing that there were people who were keeping a very careful, focused eye, that not all of our rights were going to be given away and that our world was going to be destroyed. I don't know all the ins and outs, and he was a former attorney, so he doesn't speak at all. It's like, can you give me a hint? Just don't worry about it. I'm like, okay. So I do think there's some goodness there. I do think, again, one of the silver linings of COVID was how many of the pharmaceutical companies worked together instead of against each other, so that they could take open source research that came out of the University of Pennsylvania's medical school, one for us, and that it was all shared. And so this whole RNA approach was very different. It was very open, and that's how all of this has come forward in like 7 months, which is just unbelievable. So
well, you throw a few $1 billion at companies, that it gets their attention.
Yeah. Funny how that happened. I could do something for $1 billion too.
My takeaway here is engage folks. You know, I do a lot of business with folks in their 40s and 50s, and Lori has made mention of our age. I have nieces and nephews. I don't have any children, but I have nieces and nephews who are 30, 32. And I've never had a conversation with them about their thought processes towards what they're spending their money on and why. And I think that's a valuable conversation to have and try to understand whether there is that, you know, I'm hoping there is that thoughtfulness in at least some of them, that they're making decisions based on the things that they would like to see their spending impact. So that's my commitment to try to engage in those conversations. That's my takeaway.
I think that's a great thing to do.
And I don't have kids either. I have a niece and nephews, and I can tell you, we have had those conversations, and they very clearly do not support companies that aren't social, equality, that are discriminatory, judgmental. Planned Parenthood is very important to them, that regardless of your personal beliefs, everybody should have the opportunity to follow theirs. And I don't have the research, and Lynn, maybe that's something you can help us with in the future. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think the research shows that they absolutely have a tremendous impact on consumer dollars. And that's why companies like Patagonia are very popular. The birth of B corporations are also very popular because people are making those decisions. Especially.
So I mean, that's Gen Z, right? That's coming up right now, and yes, they are very much concerned. And I have mentoring program for girls to encourage them to do STEM programs, and that generation is so aware of the issues that are impacting the climate, they're impacting the society. You just really, in order to survive and to be sustainable, to grow in the future, the business just has to be purpose driven, because this is the future. This is what your customer face will look like in the future. So in order to respond to their needs and to what they want, you have to be purpose driven. You're on mute, Lori.
I wanted to stop the phone that was ringing in the background. I didn't want everyone to be bothered. Thank you. Oxford University 2 summers ago had a conference, and they shared with their participants, if you aren't social impact driven, by 2030, you will be out of business. That for them, it is that clear cut.
I would say, so I have two teenagers, niece and nephew in New York, 14 and 16. And actually my observation, I'm a little worried. They are so committed to their ideals that I actually worry that they're a little closed-minded on it. I would say environment, any type of social equity, if some public entity seems to go against that, they are out. They don't have any, I actually found myself giving my niece a talk last year about, give people a chance to learn, don't just cut them off. So I find that in some ways very encouraging that here are these teenagers that are absolutely gun violence, those topics, they are in 110%. To the extent that I think, well, what's this going to look like in 20 years? Are they going to be able to, negotiate? Are they going to learn the flexibility, or are they going to be so strident? Are there enough of them to be so strident that they're just going to have a sweeping change of some of the things that we've been grappling with for generations? Boy, they are something else. They're really inflexible on their point of view. And so I'm a little worried, oddly enough. And I keep trying to find, if anybody has it, about a year and a half ago, I swear there was an Obama post that I cannot find where he made my point and said, let's not, I think directed at mental, you remember it, Lynn? I can't find it. If anybody can find it, or he said, let's not just cut off and dismiss people just because they don't share our point of view. Let's engage and find a way to grow together. And
yes, I do remember that. He was talking specifically about cancel culture that happened about 12 months ago.
Yeah.
In my research, I interviewed across social entrepreneurs as well as corporate executives across different generations. And I had a couple of social entrepreneurs who just out of college. So their first job is, I want to save the planet. And they have a very different idea of capitalism. They, for them, it's like, yes, capitalism or business is definitely the way to go. This is the solution. We're going to use it for good, rather than maybe more, millennial generation, they were thinking of, if I'm going to do good, I'm going to go into nonprofits. A couple of the recent graduates whom I interviewed, they said, no, I didn't think of nonprofits. I thought I'm going to start a business, because there's the whole startup movement as well. I'm going to start a business, and I want to do that for good. So that was quite interesting for me to see the difference in perspective as to what business could do and how they can affect change in the world. That was
I also think that the next generation, that those millennials, they don't see a difference between, they don't feel like they need to separate what they do during the day than what they do after hours. So if they want to have impact, and they do want to have impact, they want to have impact throughout their life and throughout their day. And just, I think another thing, so I have 20-year-olds as two sons, and one of them just says to me, the world's a big place, Mom. Like when I say, so where are you going to live? Are you going to live next door to me or not? Are you going to move next door to me? And so I just say that in the world of, supply and demand, that the world, the barriers and the silos have really broken down over time. And I think the globalization has even, worked faster given the pandemic. That may be one of the silver linings, and how connected we all are and how we can communicate so much. And so they'll find it, they'll find and where they can have impact and where the world meets their needs. I'm not endorsing being strident by any means, but in the world of choice, that's what will happen.
Yeah, perhaps it would be good to expand on the concept of purpose-driven demand, because we talk about purpose-driven, and capitalism is driven by demand, by design. So what I hear you're saying is the younger generation is looking at purpose-driven demand. They've been incorporated the concepts of purpose-driven into their demand signal, and that's the thing that industry and and big business is going to have to respond to over time.
Well, I'm glad the youngsters are doing it, but I was president of the Ecology Club when I was young. So some of us have been doing this for a long time.
Just a few years.
Yeah, I was once in LA when you could, the pollution was so bad, you could look at the sun on a cloudless day. You could actually look at the sun.
Yeah.
And I've seen the change over my lifetime. And I won't even begin to talk about the different ports I was in on Navy ships and what they were like and what they're like today and how they've been cleaned up. So there's been a lot of progress. And I think even us old guys with white hair have seen it, appreciate it. So thanks.
So I just want to be cognizant, we're now at 9:31. I want to thank you all for a most wonderful, insightful, interactive, and I'm glad we were small enough that we didn't need to break into smaller breakout rooms. I want to wish you a most wonderful day, a great weekend, and even more so, a very fulfilling and satisfying 2021.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.